Hello, welcome. I am the Tarnished Knight, and in this video I will be talking about Ashes of the Singularity Escalation, the public beta test, patch 2.94. In patch 2.94 we're going to see two areas of change, visual changes and balance changes. This particular video will be concerned primarily with just the balance changes. And a lot has changed in this patch. Practically everything has been impacted in some way, so there's actually quite a lot to dig through. I won't go through everything, but we'll just go through a lot of the main things you're likely to see, and of course I'll leave the rest for you to discover for yourselves. Beyond addressing the individual balance issues for particular units and buildings and such from the previous patch, this patch attempts to re-evaluate the symmetry and asymmetry of the two factions, the PHC and the substrate. The idea here is to remove differences that didn't add to the experience or were imperceptible, and also to enhance and focus on the differences that do matter to help make the factions feel distinct and interesting. In addition, this patch puts a fair amount of focus on trying to make air more fun and a more useful part of the game. Air has suffered in the past with its units, PHC particularly suffering quite heavily for that, so the patch attempts to rectify that situation. I should also stress what the patch does not cover. That's anything that will result in code changes in the game or the game engine itself, so that includes any bugs, generally speaking, especially those that require any code changes. So don't expect any bug fixes in this patch. It is really just visual changes and balance fixes here. For such a patch that touches everything, there are naturally a set of common changes that get applied across many units and structures. I would like to cover those common changes here first. That means that we'll be able to focus on specific unit building changes as we walk through the rest of the patch later. Perhaps one of the less expected changes that this patch brings is that all building structures get armour. Armour reduces the amount of damage received from attacks, so it now takes longer for your opponent to work through and dismantle your base, maybe giving you time to finish that Dreadnought or turn the battle around, perhaps. Defensive structures get more armour than regular structures, and of course the mighty Nexus has the most armour of any of the building structures. And while buildings have been given armour-piercing weapons overall have been simplified. Armour-piercing property has now been simplified to either a yes or a no. The weapon in question either completely ignores the armour of the structure or building or unit that it's hit, or applies the full effect of the armour that that structure, building or unit has. So now you can expect units that are specialised against certain types of units or buildings to have a weapon that has armour piercing and fight specifically against their target. An example to illustrate this is the Artemis artillery cruiser. It has an anti-structure missile that has armour piercing, so that all armour on structures, including point defence and your Nexus, is completely ignored by this particular weapon. But rest assured that very few weapons have armour piercing, so armour is still very relevant. You'll also maybe notice that HP and shield regeneration has been standardised across the tiers, so all shields of each particular tier 1, 2, 3, 4 now have a standard rate of regeneration for the substrate, and hit point regeneration on the Dreadnoughts and Juggernauts have also been standardised across the tiers. Also, the speed of ground units has been standardised, and unit vision distances have also been standardised, as all according to tier. You can expect some variation between the tiers, such as scouts can see further and travel faster, and you can also expect air to see further than their grounded equivalent units. And there's also a small change to the radar carried by units, you'll find now that it extends at least a little ahead of their vision now. And the main purpose of that is to help the AI with target acquisition and help them give you a much better game. So having covered the main general changes of the patch, I'd like to now move on to discussing frigates in more detail. The first thing you'll notice about frigates is that squads are back for the PHC, and that squad size has been standardised between the two factions. In fact, frigates have gone through a level of increased standardisation between the two factions. This is important in terms of keeping the game fair and balanced in the early game, which is primarily about node capturing. So the areas of standardisation that have been considered cost, build time, damage capacity, damage dirt speed, and so on and so forth. Brutes and Martyrs are in squads of 3. They're useful for leading early game skirmishes with their tankiness, and you should notice that they are cheaper to build. Archers and Reapers are in squads of 2, and they provide excellent additional firepower support for Brutes and Martyrs, but they are fragile and need the protection of Brutes and Martyrs. Atlas and the Sky Cleansers are in squads of 2. Their primary purpose is now to shoot down drones. Still has anti-air capability, but it's not as effective as the anti-air cruisers. You'll probably find the drones are a little bit more prevalent in this patch. With regards to the Hermes and the Capacitor, the Hermes radar range has been extended to match that of the Capacitor, and now with the radar this allows them to work alongside the Atlas and the Sky Cleansers to extend the range of their anti-air, anti-drone capability. Also Hermes and Capacitors, obviously their extended radars will also help artillery units as well find their mark beyond the default visibility range that they have. Also you'll find that Tormentors have been toned down a little, as they were a tad bit too effective in 2.92. And a quick shout out to Scarabs. In the previous patch they were particularly effective, a little bit overpowered. They have been reduced in power somewhat rebalanced, so hopefully they shouldn't be able to overwhelm as quite as effectively as they used to be able to. In addition to these changes, you'll probably also find that you'll burn through your logistics quicker in this patch than in the previous game, 2.92. So it's a good idea to get started on those quantum relays and quantum archives as soon as possible. Not only does the Nexus have improved armour, but its weaponry has become much stronger as well, so frigate armies are really going to struggle to take a Nexus down. In addition, creeps are significantly stronger than they were previously. The Martyr-like creeps are resilient but have short-ranged weaponry. The Reaper-like creeps, they have strong ranged attacks, but they are relatively fragile. And then you have the Saboteur-like creeps that are not only providing strong attacks and fairly resilient, but their attacks are also able to target air units as well as ground units. Next up are cruisers. Cruisers are mostly units that are specific to countering some form of strategy. The biggest change you'll probably notice with cruisers, specifically the PHC cruisers, is that now a number of them now require energy in order to use their special weapons. Because the PHC don't have access to capacitors like the Substrate do, the PHC weapons will recharge a little faster. But as we will see later, there is something an energy-strapped PHC force can do to help with recharging weapons a little faster. The most impactful changes in this class of units be the Zeus has been toned down a little, still very tanky and still good at its job, but not too good as it was previously. The Avenger was seriously underperforming in the previous patch and has now been given a significant buff, but also as a result that's become also a reasonable generalist unit as well. The Athena and Maulers are still heavyweight, powerful, brawling units, excellent against Zeus and Avengers. They can still be overwhelmed by frigate armies, and they still prove to be effective against PD and Dreadnoughts. Their primary weapons, the energy weapons that they fire, also require energy to use. This is obviously new for the Athena, obviously something that Substrate players are used to for the Mauler. Then we have the Artemis and Destructor. These are anti-structure long-range support cruisers. You find that the Artemis missiles will fly a little faster now, allowing it to provide a little better support to PHC armies against other units, though its primary purpose is still structures. As we mentioned earlier, the equipped special anti-structure missiles have armor penetration. Those particular weapons require energy in order to fire. The Drone Hive has a special place in the Substrate arsenal for being the only cruiser that they can build without needing a quantum archive first. It has an extra ground attacking drone squad added to it, so it makes it a little bit more versatile, and this also increases the importance of having Atlas and Sky Cleansers on battlefield early. The Nemesis, a long-ranged sniper unit with railgun. Still fragile, still very powerful, deals a lot of damage with its railgun. That railgun has armor piercing. Limitations of it now is that it cannot target frigates, and that railgun requires energy. We won't forget that the Nemesis does have a couple of sub-weapons that it can use against frigates. And then finally, the Clutch of Eggs. That proved to be a very powerful unit in the previous patch, and it's been slightly weakened, so it shouldn't be quite so overwhelming as it's been before. Next, you probably want to look at Dreadnoughts and Juggernauts. These big behemoths have a commanding presence on the battlefield. They are still, as far as this patch is concerned, a work in progress. Dreadnoughts have had their build times reduced, although their costs have been kept up, so they are quite economically tough to build. Probably the biggest and most important change is the Eye of Darkness Juggernaut has armor piercing restored to its primary weapon. Apart from that, the armor values have been adjusted slightly. Juggernaut's armor is particularly tough now. There hasn't been particularly huge standout changes to these units as of yet. Keeping best till last, air units, they have gone through significant rework so that they play better, feel better, and matter a lot more in the game. The scout units, the Pan and the Searcher, are now faster and nimble, but they are a little bit fragile. Their big change, however, is the extreme visual range and radar range that they bring, making them far more effective at the information intel gathering game. Furies and Dominators, our air superiority fighters, are still the best form of anti-air in the game. They both feature air-to-air missiles, and those missiles have armor penetration. They're also tougher than they were before, which allows them to better resist anti-air attacks. And the Hades and the Punisher have gone through some changes as well. Specifically, their weapons have been tweaked and improved. Hades especially, so the weapon was probably not working as well as it should, so the rework on Hades makes it a much more effective bomber than it was previously, and the air units now move around more effectively and far more satisfyingly. When taking time to consider Air T2 options, the Air Marauder and the Air Rampager, the gunships of both factions are now more resilient and rebalanced. The Air Marauder even sports a brand new version of its own weapon, and will also be more effective against T2 and T3 than it was before. The Strategic Bomber and Air Harbinger, they are the heavy bombers of their factions, and they have been given a lot of HP and shields, and their weapons also feature AP as well. A little special shout out to the Instigator and Air Utility unit that the PHC had originally, as it probably still nodes. It's going to struggle now against creeps, especially because creeps are now tougher and have anti-air capabilities, so you probably want to use your Instigators for actually trying to steal recently captured nodes off your opponent that aren't properly protected. It actually now serves as an aerial capacitor unit for the PHC, allowing it to recharge weapons of nearby friendly units. I had alluded to that the PHC had a little something to help recharge energy weapons, and the Instigator is now serving that capacity. As a result, it's no longer buildable from the advanced air factory, and it has been moved to the air factory instead, given its new role and purpose and utility. I think that just about wraps it up for a quick overview of many of the key changes in patch 2.94 for Ashes of the Singularity Escalation. I hope you found this video useful, and if you have any questions, then please reach out either directly here or at the official Ashes of the Singularity Escalation Discord server. Thank you for watching.